The morning sun rose over the small, dusty village, casting long shadows on the cracked clay walls of humble huts. Amid the quiet murmur of waking villagers, a girl named Amahle stirred from her thin straw mat. Her body ached from years of toil, yet her eyes held a soft light, a spark that refused to be extinguished by poverty. In a village where survival meant sacrifice, Amahle had learned to bear the weight of the world with a quiet strength few could comprehend. Amahle's days began long before the sun touched the highest branches of the trees. She worked the parched fields, her fingers raw from tilling soil that rarely yielded enough for her family. Each step was careful, measured, as if the earth itself demanded repayment. When her chores in the fields ended, she walked to the nearby river, balancing a worn clay pot on her head, filled with water for her ailing younger sibling. Her little brother, frail and feverish, needed her constant care, and she gave it willingly, though her own body longed for rest. Despite her hardships, Amahle's kindness was known throughout the village. She would share a morsel of bread with starving neighbors, tend to injured animals, and listen to the sorrows of those whose voices were too often ignored. Villagers often whispered of her unusual patience and wisdom, of a heart that seemed larger than her fragile frame. Yet, not all looked kindly upon her. Some sneered, calling her foolish for dreaming beyond the confines of mud walls and thatched roofs. Still, Amahle held her gaze steady, her pride unbroken, her dreams unshaken. At night, as she lay under the dim flicker of a tallow lamp, she let herself imagine another life. She dreamed of wide-open spaces, of rooms filled with laughter rather than hunger, of a future where she could rise above suffering and help others. But those dreams were tangled with fear. Could someone like her, small, poor, uneducated, ever belong to a world so different from her own? Each hope felt fragile, like a bird perched on a trembling branch. Rumors floated through the village like dry autumn leaves. Tales of the royal palace spread, whispers of a search for a maiden of rare heart and spirit, though no one knew why. The stories stirred a curiosity and longing deep in Amahle's chest. Could this be her chance to change her fate? Or was it just another cruel tease, another unattainable dream? The questions lingered, heavy and insistent. Even in the midst of her suffering, Amahle's mind remained sharp. She observed people closely, sensing their intentions and feelings with a quiet skill that often surprised the villagers. She had a knack for solving problems, for seeing connections others missed. Her strength was not only in her body but in her heart and mind, a combination few could match. And so, Amahle continued her life, walking the narrow path between hope and despair, her soul yearning for a world she had only glimpsed in fleeting dreams. Every chore, every hardship, every glance of scorn hardened her resolve. For in her heart, she knew that life had more to offer, and perhaps if she dared to reach, her destiny was waiting somewhere beyond the village she called home. The village had its secrets, but none more feared than the power of noble Zuberi, a man whose wealth and influence shadowed the land. Fields were taxed beyond reason, labor demanded without mercy, and villagers lived under the constant threat of punishment. Each day, Amahle witnessed injustice: a mother forced to give up her child for a paltry debt, a farmer's crops seized for failing to meet impossible quotas. Her anger simmered, a quiet fire beneath the surface, and it was not long before she could no longer stand silently. One morning, as Zuberi's men rounded up grain from a struggling family, Amahle stepped forward. Her voice was firm, her eyes unyielding as she confronted the men. The villagers held their breath, fearing the wrath that might follow. Amahle's courage sparked murmurs of admiration and whispered hope. But standing up came at a price. Later that day, her own fields were trampled, her meager belongings scattered. The world was harsh, yet her resolve only deepened. She could not unsee the suffering, nor could she unhear the cries of the weak. Then came the tragedy. A sudden fire swept through the village, consuming huts, crops, and the fragile belongings of families who had little to spare. Smoke choked the narrow paths, flames danced with cruel delight, and Amahle's own home was reduced to embers. Her brother's cough worsened, the air thick with ash and despair. Neighbors wept, children wailed, and the village seemed swallowed by hopelessness. In that moment, Amahle felt the full weight of the world pressing down on her. She had survived hardship before, but now the stakes were higher. Survival itself felt uncertain. Amidst this despair, a new presence arrived. A royal envoy, clad in fine silks and riding a horse that gleamed like polished ebony, entered the village. His message spread quickly. The palace sought a maiden of rare heart and spirit, a girl whose courage and goodness could bring balance to their troubled realm. The villagers speculated endlessly. Some scoffed, others whispered that it was a sign from destiny itself. Amahle felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of fear and hope. Could she, a simple village girl with nothing but determination and a kind heart, be the one they sought? For the first time, the possibility of change seemed real. Amahle thought of her brother, of the families crushed by Zubri's greed, of the life she had always dreamed of beyond these dusty roads. Perhaps this was the chance to break free from despair, to bring not only herself but others into a brighter future. Yet doubt shadowed her heart. What if she failed? What if the palace rejected her, leaving her more alone and broken than before? Still, the spark of courage ignited within her. Amahle realized that action was necessary. Waiting would only let misery dictate her life. She could endure, she could strive, she could dare. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. Destiny, she sensed, was calling her, and she would answer no matter the cost. As the sun set behind the village hills, casting a warm glow on scorched fields and shattered homes, Amahle made a silent vow. She would leave the village. She would face the unknown. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would discover a life worthy of her dreams, a life where her courage and kindness could finally find their reward. This covers sections 1 and 2, totaling approximately 1,700 words, establishing Amahle's character, struggles, emotional depth, and the catalyst for her journey, while keeping the tone dramatic, suspenseful, and accessible. The dawn broke pale and trembling as Amahle set out from the ruins of her village. Her heart was heavy, yet a quiet determination guided her steps. The path ahead was uncertain, winding through dense forests and rocky hills, but she felt that for the first time in her life, hope was more powerful than fear. Every step she took carried the weight of her past, the hardship, the loss, the longing, but also the possibility of a future she had dared only to imagine. The forest loomed like a living wall, shadows stretching across narrow dirt paths. Branches clawed at her skin, and the cries of unseen creatures echoed in the stillness. Amahle's eyes darted constantly, scanning for danger, yet she pressed forward. Each obstacle she faced seemed a test of courage, a challenge to see whether her heart and spirit were strong enough for what lay ahead. She learned to read the subtle signs of the forest, a broken twig warning of a wild animal, the rustle of leaves signaling rain, the way sunlight pierced the canopy in fleeting patterns, guiding her forward. Rivers appeared suddenly, cutting across her path like silver threads. The water was icy and swift, threatening to sweep her off her feet. Yet, with careful steps and steady hands, she crossed each current, holding her brother's memory in her mind as a source of strength. She paused at times to catch her breath, her body trembling, but each pause gave her moments to reflect, to imagine the palace gates opening before her, and to remind herself that this journey was more than a physical passage. It was a journey of the heart. Along the way, Amahle encountered others in need. A traveler had fallen and injured his leg, stranded beneath the forest's shadow. Without hesitation, she tore strips of cloth from her dress to fashion a bandage, offering water and encouragement. Nearby, a small bird trapped in a bramble chirped in fear. Amahle's gentle hands freed it, and it flew overhead, singing a song of triumph. Each act, small as it seemed, reinforced the truth she had always known. Kindness and courage could light even the darkest path. Yet the journey was not without doubt. Nights were the hardest. Alone under the cold stars, Amahle felt the ache of homesickness deep in her chest. Would the palace accept her? Would she be seen as merely a poor village girl, unworthy of the grandeur she imagined? Shadows of fear crept into her thoughts, whispering that she was too small, too weak, too insignificant to matter. But she shook off the despair, reminding herself of the lives she carried with her, the brother she loved, the family she longed to help, and the girl she had always hoped to become. The terrain grew rougher as the palace drew near. Hills became cliffs, and the wind howled through narrow passes like a warning. Amahle stumbled, scraped her hands and knees, and once nearly fell, but something within her refused to break. She whispered to herself, not as a prayer but as a promise, "I will not turn back. I will reach the place where destiny waits." Each painful step hardened her resolve, tempered her courage, and sharpened her mind. And in those quiet moments, the palace began to reveal itself, not yet its gates or halls, but a presence, a pull, as if the walls themselves had been waiting for her arrival. Amahle could not explain it, but she felt a strange, electric sense that her journey was only the beginning. Something inside the palace, and something inside herself, was stirring, ready to awaken. By the time the forest thinned and the first glimpses of golden towers appeared in the distance, Amahle's heart pounded with anticipation. She had faced the shadows of her own doubts, the wrath of nature, and the tests of her compassion. She had proven, at least to herself, that courage and goodness could survive even the harshest trials. Now, standing at the threshold of a world she had once only dreamed of, Amahle felt a mixture of awe, fear, and an undeniable excitement. Her journey had transformed her, and though the palace's secrets remained hidden, she knew in her heart that she was ready to face whatever awaited behind its towering gates. Amahle's journey had carried her across forests, rivers, and rugged hills, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of the palace. Even from a distance, its towers gleamed like molten gold under the afternoon sun. Walls of stone rose high, crowned with delicate carvings that seemed to capture sunlight and shadow in equal measure. Gardens sprawled in orderly perfection, fountains singing with crystal water. Amahle stopped for a moment, her breath caught between awe and fear. She had imagined grandeur before, but nothing in her village, nothing in her life, could have prepared her for this. The carriage that had been sent to bring her wound through long avenues lined with towering trees. Courtiers and servants moved with quiet precision, their robes brushing the marble floors and golden gates. Amahle's heart raced. Each step she took felt both tiny and monumental. She clutched the folds of her worn dress, feeling suddenly small and exposed in the presence of such wealth and power. When the gates swung open, a hush fell over the palace entrance. Guards nodded, servants whispered, and Amahle stepped forward, her feet tentative yet steady. She noticed the stark contrast, the silk-clad attendants, the polished floors, the glittering chandeliers above, and the silent expectation that seemed to hang over the entire hall. She was acutely aware of her humble shoes, her simple dress, her unadorned hair. Every eye that glanced her way seemed to measure her worth, and the weight of their scrutiny pressed upon her chest. Amahle was led through winding corridors, each more ornate than the last. Paintings of long-gone rulers, gilded mirrors, and statues that seemed to watch her every movement created a sense of both awe and intimidation. She felt a mixture of reverence and fear. Every step brought a flutter in her stomach, a dance between excitement and terror. The palace, magnificent as it was, seemed to whisper a warning. One false move here could mean humiliation or rejection. Then she was brought before the queen. Amahle's eyes widened at the sight of her, regal, poised, and seemingly untouchable. The queen's expression was calm but distant, her posture perfect, her gaze sharp and observant. There was no warmth, at least not yet, only a piercing curiosity as if she were weighing Amahle's very soul. Amahle felt a strange pull in her chest, a recognition she could not name, a thread connecting her own beating heart to the queen's presence. It stirred a mixture of fear and wonder that made her knees almost buckle. The courtiers whispered behind their fans, their eyes sharp with judgment and speculation. Some seemed intrigued, others skeptical, but all were watching Amahle carefully, noting her every gesture, every breath. The palace hierarchy was palpable in every corner. Even the air seemed laden with expectation, as though it too were testing her. Amahle realized she had stepped into a world where each word and movement carried weight far beyond her village experience. Yet, amidst the grandeur, Amahle felt a quiet strength stirring within her. She reminded herself that the palace's beauty did not define her worth. Her courage, her kindness, and the fire in her heart were her armor. She held her head high, shoulders squared, eyes meeting the queen's with a mixture of respect and resolve. Though she was far from home, though her life had been one of hardship and simplicity, she knew she had the strength to navigate this alien world. As she waited for the queen's judgment, Amahle felt something shift. The palace, with all its magnificence and rigid rules, seemed less intimidating than the journey she had endured. The rivers crossed, the forests braved, the nights spent under stars and shadows, they had all prepared her for this moment. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. And as she stood before the queen, Amahle's heart whispered a quiet truth. She belonged here in some way the world had not yet revealed. The queen's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly as she regarded Amahle. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them, a hint of recognition or curiosity, though neither understood its meaning yet. Amahle sensed that this meeting was not merely ceremonial, it was the beginning of a deeper connection, one that would challenge and change them both. And so, standing amidst the shimmering grandeur of the palace, Amahle took a steadying breath. Her journey had led her to this threshold, a place where every step held risk and every glance carried consequence. Yet she felt a quiet certainty deep within her. Whatever awaited her behind these walls, she was ready to face it. The palace, vast and intimidating as it was, could not overshadow the courage and heart that had carried her here. The palace, vast and glittering, held secrets that few ever glimpsed. Amahle had felt the weight of its grandeur, the sharp eyes of courtiers, and the quiet scrutiny of the queen, yet nothing prepared her for what was about to unfold. In the private chambers, away from the polished floors and gilded hallways, the queen regarded Amahle with a mixture of awe, hesitation, and something deeper, recognition. For a moment neither spoke. Amahle felt the stillness press around her, heavy with unspoken truths. The queen's eyes softened, a flicker of emotion passing over her face, and Amahle felt a strange warmth, a pull she could not explain. It was as though the queen saw something in her that transcended her humble appearance, something that resonated with a past long hidden. Amahle's pulse quickened. Her heart whispered questions she dared not speak aloud. Was it possible that she belonged here in ways she had never imagined? Then the first revelation came. A subtle token, a ring worn by the queen for decades, glimmered faintly under the torchlight. Its design, intricate and familiar, sparked a memory buried deep in Amahle's earliest years. A lullaby sung by a woman she barely remembered, a fragment of a cradle long gone. The realization struck her like lightning. She had been separated from something, someone, who had shaped her destiny long before she knew it. Amahle's mind raced, connecting fragmented memories with the whispers of the village, the journey she had endured, and the inexplicable pull she felt toward this place. The queen, too, seemed shaken. She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering, her voice soft but commanding when she finally spoke. Though she did not reveal everything, the queen hinted at a truth that Amahle could feel in her bones. The girl was not merely a visitor to the palace. She was bound by fate to its heart, to a story written before either of them had understood it. Courtiers in the shadows watched with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Some whispered that the girl might be a hidden heir, a child lost to the chaos of the past. Others feared her presence, sensing that her arrival could upset the delicate balance of power. Amahle's mind swirled with questions and fear. Could it be true that she was connected to the royal family? And if so, why had she been hidden, abandoned, or forgotten? The emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Disbelief, hope, fear, and a yearning for the love she had never known. Yet beneath the confusion, a quiet strength emerged. She had endured hardship, fought for justice, and faced the unknown. If destiny had brought her here, she would meet it with courage and grace. The queen's walls of regal composure began to crack. For years she had carried guilt and grief, a silent burden that no advisor or noble could lighten. Seeing Amahle, her courage, her kindness, her quiet strength, stirred something long buried. There was recognition, yes, but also a painful reminder of choices made too long ago, of loss endured and secrets kept. The queen's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Amahle, without fully understanding why, felt a wave of compassion and connection that bridged the gap between them. Suspense hung thick in the chamber as advisors approached, their faces tight with concern and intrigue. Some whispered of opportunity, plotting how Amahle's presence might serve their ambitions. Others recoiled, sensing the girl's strength, her potential to disrupt schemes carefully crafted over years. Amahle, though small and untrained in courtly politics, felt the weight of it all. She realized that her journey was no longer about reaching the palace. It was about claiming her place in a world that had long been both her destiny and her challenge. Despite the tension, Amahle's character shone through. She observed the courtiers, reading their intentions with the sharp mind and keen insight honed through years of struggle. She understood that every move, every word, and every glance would carry consequences. Yet fear did not paralyze her. Instead, it fueled her determination. She would not be a pawn. She would not be overlooked. She would meet this destiny whatever it demanded. The queen, finally, spoke words that confirmed what Amahle had long suspected. The girl's arrival was no accident. Something in her presence stirred the palace, awakened memories and opened doors long closed. The connection between them was undeniable, though its full meaning remained veiled. The air between Amahle and the queen shimmered with potential, an unspoken promise that together they would uncover truths, confront challenges, and reshape the course of the kingdom. Amahle stood taller, her heart steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. She had entered the palace a poor girl from a forgotten village, but she now sensed that her courage, her compassion, and her integrity had prepared her for something far greater. The queen, too, began to lower her defenses, allowing glimpses of vulnerability, regret, and hope to show. A bond, fragile but undeniable, was forming between them, a bond that would carry both of them through trials, dangers, and revelations yet to come. As Amahle left the chamber that day, she felt the weight of destiny settle upon her shoulders, not as a burden but as a call. The palace was no longer a distant dream, it was her reality, and within its walls lay both danger and possibility. She had discovered her connection to the queen, glimpsed the secrets that had long hidden in shadow, and faced the first truths of her own identity. Yet even as she walked the glittering corridors, Amahle knew that this was only the beginning. Her courage would be tested, her kindness scrutinized, and her heart challenged in ways she could not yet imagine. And through it all, she would need to trust in herself, in the path destiny had set before her, and in the unspoken bond she now shared with the queen. The palace, glittering and grand, was not a place of comfort or ease for Amahle. Every corner held whispers, every corridor concealed sharp glances, and every smile might mask ambition or envy. Though she had survived her journey through forests and rivers, she now realized that the greatest challenges were not in the wild, but within these gilded walls. Courtiers moved like shadows, their every word calculated, their every gesture watched. Amahle's heart pounded as she stepped into this world of subtle threats, realizing that courage alone would not be enough. She would need wisdom, patience, and steadfastness. The first test came almost immediately. Some courtiers, threatened by her presence, sought to undermine her. A lady-in-waiting spread rumors of her humble origins, questioning whether someone from a village could hold any influence in a palace of kings and queens. A young noble boy, ambitious and cruel, whispered lies that painted her as an intruder, an opportunist who had no right to stand among royalty. Amahle felt the sting of their words, but she remembered the lessons of her village. Humility was not weakness, and patience could turn enemies into allies. She held her head high, meeting every glance with quiet confidence, refusing to allow fear to dictate her actions. One evening, as Amahle carried water through the palace gardens, she overheard a plot whispered between two advisors. Their plan was subtle but dangerous: to discredit her, to paint her as unfit to serve the queen, and to seize her influence before it could grow. Amahle's mind raced. She could confront them directly, but wisdom taught her to observe first, to gather knowledge before action. She spent nights thinking, watching, and learning the delicate currents of palace life. Each encounter sharpened her instincts and strengthened her resolve. Yet the palace was not only a place of deception, it was also a place of learning and opportunity. Amahle discovered the art of diplomacy, the power of listening, and the subtle ways that kindness could win trust. She aided servants who had been overworked, comforted a frightened messenger, and quietly ensured that fairness touched the lives of those overlooked. Each small act earned her allies, even among those who had doubted her. Slowly, the walls of suspicion began to crumble, replaced with a cautious respect that would, in time, grow into loyalty. The greatest test, however, came unexpectedly. One afternoon, a fire broke out in the palace kitchens, flames licking dangerously close to the servants' quarters and a wing of the queen's private chambers. Panic spread quickly. Amahle, without hesitation, rushed into the chaos. She guided frightened servants to safety, carried a child who had been trapped, and even helped a young guard escape the smoke. By the time the fire was brought under control, her courage and decisiveness had been witnessed by all. The queen, watching from a distance, felt a surge of pride and relief. Amahle had not only saved lives but demonstrated a bravery and presence of mind that no courtly training could teach. Even as small victories bolstered her position, Amahle faced emotional challenges as well. Rumors and whispers continued, and the weight of expectations pressed heavily on her shoulders. She felt the tension of being both an outsider and someone destined for greatness. Nights were restless, filled with doubt, questions, and the quiet fear that one mistake could undo everything she had fought for. Yet each morning she reminded herself that her strength had carried her through greater dangers, and she drew courage from her own heart. Amid these trials, Amahle also began to uncover subtle truths about the palace itself. Secrets long buried emerged. Alliances forged in shadows, hidden grudges, and decisions made in desperation. She realized that her role was more than survival, it was influence. Each act of compassion, each display of courage, had ripple effects that could change the balance of power. Slowly, she understood that the palace was not just a place to belong, but a place where she could make a difference, where her values could reshape the world around her. Through these challenges, her bond with the queen deepened. The queen, observing Amahle's quiet strength and moral clarity, began to trust her judgment, seeking counsel and sharing glimpses of her own vulnerabilities. In the palace halls where deception often thrived, Amahle became a figure of integrity, a rare presence that inspired both admiration and caution. Her courage and empathy illuminated the path for others, subtly transforming a world once dominated by fear and ambition. By the end of these trials, Amahle had proven herself. She had faced sabotage, danger, and intrigue, yet she had remained steadfast. Courtiers who had doubted her now spoke of her with respect, Servants who had once feared were drawn to her guidance. The palace, once a realm of intimidating grandeur and veiled threats, had become a stage where Amahl's courage, intelligence, and kindness shone like a beacon. And though challenges still awaited, she now understood something vital. Destiny was not only about being chosen, it was about rising to meet every trial with heart, mind, and spirit aligned. Amahl's journey through the treacherous waters of palace life was far from over, but she had proven that she could survive, adapt, and thrive. Her presence was no longer merely tolerated, it was recognized, quietly celebrated, and increasingly influential. In the quiet moments, when she paused to watch the sunlight on the marble floors or the glimmer of a servant's grateful smile, she felt a sense of purpose settling deep in her chest. The palace had tested her, and she had risen to the challenge. The palace hall was alive with tension, a silent electricity that seemed to pulse through the marble floors and golden pillars. Courtiers whispered behind fans, eyes darting toward the girl who had, in months, quietly reshaped the pulse of the court. Amahle stood near the throne, no longer the hesitant village girl who had trembled before opulence, but a figure of quiet strength, courage, and undeniable virtue. Every trial she had faced, the journey through forests, the hardships of her village, the intrigue of the palace, had led to this moment. The queen, seated upon her throne, observed Amahle with an intensity that sent ripples through the assembly. There was a visible struggle in her gaze, a battle between authority, guilt, and something far deeper, recognition. The girl before her, humble yet radiant, brave yet compassionate, carried the reflection of a past long buried. And now, in the presence of witnesses who had doubted, judged, and schemed, the queen's emotions reached a breaking point. Courtiers had gathered, expecting a ceremony or a proclamation, yet none anticipated the raw honesty that was about to unfold. The queen rose, her robes flowing like liquid gold, every eye following her graceful but unsteady steps toward Amahle. She did not speak at first. Her gaze fell upon the girl's face, tracing the lines of resilience, the eyes filled with courage, and the posture that betrayed no fear despite the magnitude of her achievements. It was a recognition that transcended words. Then, with a movement that stunned the hall, the queen fell to her knees before Amahle. The gesture was not of mere formality, it was an emotional surrender, a confession of awe, gratitude, and a truth long hidden. Amahle's heart leapt, her mind struggling to comprehend the depth of this moment. The queen, the woman who had seemed untouchable, who had carried the weight of kingdoms and secrets, now showed vulnerability in a way that no courtly intrigue could suppress. The court gasped. Courtiers whispered in disbelief, their murmurs filled with jealousy, shock, and a dawning respect. Nobles who had once plotted against her now realized that Amahle's strength could not be measured in wealth, titles, or bloodline alone. It was forged in hardship, kindness, courage, and unwavering integrity. Here was a girl who had endured fires, rivers, and treacheries both in the forest and the palace, and now, standing in the center of the kingdom's heart, she had inspired the very ruler to bow before her virtue. Amahle's mind raced. The realization of her destiny, the threads connecting her to the palace, the queen, and the future, fell into place. She had not merely survived, she had transformed. Her bravery had saved lives, her compassion had won allies, and her wisdom had untangled plots that threatened to divide the palace. And now, she faced the culmination of her journey, recognition not from strangers, not from distant hopes, but from the very figure whose approval mattered most, the queen herself. The queen's voice, finally breaking the silence, was soft yet resonant, carrying both authority and profound emotion. She spoke of Amahle's courage, her compassion, and her rightful place, not merely as a visitor to the palace, but as a force that had shaped its destiny. Each word seemed to ripple through the hall, touching the hearts of courtiers, servants, and all who witnessed. Amahle felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the quiet release of a lifetime of suffering and struggle. In that moment, Amahle's identity was fully realized. The lost girl from a humble village had become a figure of honor and destiny. Her trials, her journey, and her unwavering spirit had led her to this recognition. She stood with her head held high, a gentle smile forming as she understood the full weight of what had been accomplished, not through power or manipulation, but through the enduring strength of heart and character. The queen remained on her knees for a few more moments, then rose slowly, hands trembling slightly, eyes glistening with emotion. She took Amahle's hand in hers, a symbolic gesture of unity, acceptance, and the acknowledgement of a bond forged through courage, suffering, and destiny. In that quiet, powerful moment, the palace seemed to exhale, as though the walls themselves recognized the significance of what had transpired. Amahl's gaze swept across the hall. Courtiers, nobles, and servants alike bowed in respect, a reflection of the profound shift that had taken place. Jealousy was replaced with admiration, fear with acknowledgement. The girl who had once been dismissed as insignificant now held a position that could not be ignored, a living testament to virtue, resilience, and the transformative power of goodness. And so, in the golden light of the palace, amidst whispered awe and silent tears, Amahle stood as the embodiment of hope realized. The queen's gesture had not only validated her courage and kindness, but it had also healed a wound that had long festered within the royal heart. Recognition, respect, and destiny had converged in this single breathtaking moment, and the palace, the kingdom, and Amahle herself would never be the same again. Amahle had faced the trials, endured the injustices, and navigated the treacheries of life and court. Now she had achieved the emotional and dramatic culmination of her journey, a moment where suffering met recognition, courage met validation, and destiny revealed its true face. And though new challenges would surely come, Amahle had proven, irrevocably, that her heart, spirit, and integrity were forces that even the grandeur and power of a palace could not overshadow. The palace, once a place of cold grandeur and quiet intrigue, now seemed transformed, not merely by its new occupant Amahle, but by the ripple of her courage, integrity, and compassion. The golden halls, once filled with whispers of jealousy and suspicion, now echoed with respect, admiration, and a renewed sense of purpose. Amahle had earned her place not through birthright alone, but through the unwavering strength of her heart and spirit. For Amahle herself, the transformation was deeply personal. She had entered the palace as a poor girl from a humble village, carrying the burdens of hardship, loss, and longing. She had faced trials that tested her courage, wisdom, and empathy. And now, standing within the palace, recognized by the queen and acknowledged by all, she finally felt a sense of belonging, a validation of every sacrifice, every act of kindness, every moment she had endured. The girl who had dreamed of life beyond the village had become the woman who could shape it. The queen, too, underwent a profound transformation. Once distant, stoic, and burdened by secrets and grief, she began to show vulnerability and openness. Amahle's presence had reminded her of lost opportunities, of choices made in fear, and of the power of compassion. Slowly she began to heal, releasing the guilt and isolation that had haunted her for years. The queen now sought Amahle's counsel not as a subject, but as a trusted ally, a kindred spirit whose heart and mind complemented her own. In their shared bond, the palace found balance, strength tempered with empathy, power guided by virtue. The ripple of change extended beyond Amahle and the queen. Courtiers and advisors, once steeped in ambition and rivalry, began to reassess their roles. They observed the quiet authority that Amahle commanded, not through fear, but through respect and integrity. The palace's hierarchy, once rigid and unyielding, softened subtly, influenced by her example. Policies began to reflect fairness, compassion, and justice. Small reforms, initiated by Amahle's guidance, improved the lives of servants and citizens alike, bridging the gap between privilege and common life. Amahle also took steps to reconnect with her roots. She ensured that her village, once devastated by fire and poverty, received support. Fields were restored, homes rebuilt, and families offered assistance. She brought her younger brother to the palace, ensuring his care and education, while never forgetting the lessons of humility, perseverance, and kindness that had shaped her own life. In doing so, she bridged the worlds of palace and village, showing that true strength lay not in separation but in connection. Despite her new role, Amahle remained true to herself. She never abandoned the values that had carried her through hardship: courage, empathy, and fairness. She listened to the voices of those overlooked, advocated for justice, and reminded the court that nobility was not measured by birth, wealth, or power, but by the capacity to act with integrity and heart. Her presence became a quiet revolution, inspiring others to act not for personal gain, but for the good of all. The queen, watching Amahle's journey unfold, often reflected on the strange and beautiful twist of fate that had brought the girl into her life. The bond between them, forged in trials and tempered by courage, had become unbreakable. It was a bond of respect, understanding, and a shared recognition that both of them had been shaped and transformed by the events that had brought them together. The queen's once lonely heart now beat with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. In quiet moments, Amahle would walk through the palace gardens, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her face and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. She thought of the village she had left behind, the journey she had undertaken, and the trials she had faced. Each memory, once heavy with pain, now glimmered with meaning. Every hardship had prepared her, every act of courage had strengthened her, and every moment of kindness had shaped the woman she had become. The palace itself seemed to reflect this transformation. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was trust. Where there had been rivalry, now there was collaboration. Where there had been fear, now there was hope. Amahle's journey had not only changed her life but had subtly reshaped the very heart of the kingdom, proving that one person guided by courage and integrity could inspire lasting change. As she stood with the queen, hand in hand, looking out over the gardens, Amahle felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had achieved more than recognition. She had found purpose, forged bonds, and brought hope to those who had long been forgotten. The palace, the kingdom, and her own life had been transformed, and in that transformation lay the quiet triumph of the human spirit. Amahle's story, from the humble village to the heart of the palace, had reached its resolution. She had faced injustice, danger, and doubt, yet she emerged whole, strong, compassionate, and guided by an inner light that no darkness could extinguish. And though the future held unknown challenges, Amahle had proven that with courage, kindness, and unwavering faith in one's own heart, even the greatest obstacles could be overcome, and the most extraordinary destinies could be fulfilled. In the golden light of the palace, with the queen at her side and the kingdom watching with newfound admiration, Amahle embraced her transformation. She was no longer merely a girl from a poor village. She was a symbol of hope, justice, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Her journey had come full circle, and in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of a life lived with purpose, courage, and unshakable integrity.